Most kids had a pretty small world back in the 1930s. What these movies and comic strips did was broaden their horizons. It gave them a chance to escape the everyday. It gave them a chance to sort of vicariously live through these characters. And this was very important at a time when there was a lot of hardship.
They were so enamored with the heroes that were offering them escape from the Depression, escape from the streets and the tenements, escape ultimately from the war, and it was the cheapest form of entertainment that was available.
Comics could imagine the unimaginable vistas. You saw tales that were stark morality tales, good and evil. There was not a lot of gray, there wasn't a lot of depth to the characterization, with the exception of you always knew who the good person was and who the bad person was.
Most of the comic guys were blue-collar guys, or maybe they had a high school education. In Marston's case, he was a Harvard psychologist.
William Moulton Marston is a really fascinating guy in the history of 20th century pop culture.
Marston was an incredibly educated man, a PhD, went to Harvard.
He was a psychologist, an artist, a storyteller.
He was really one of the first celebrity psychologists.
Almost like the Dr. Phil of his time, he wrote a lot of pop psychology for some of the big magazines, Good Housekeeping, things like this.
He had very definite views on human sexuality and on children's psychology. I think he was the author of a couple of children's psychology books that were used as gospel at the time. Whether it was doing research in child psychology or developing the lie detector, Marston clearly was always looking for the truth wherever he was working.
Interestingly enough, the idea for blood pressure and the polygraph came from Marston's wife, Elizabeth, who had observed that when people were under stress, their blood pressure would rise.
He actually had an act with the lie detector where he would get pretty girls out of the audience and attach them to his machine, and then he would ask them mildly embarrassing questions, maybe about their boyfriends or husbands.
It's interesting to note he and his wife both had the same education. They went to different colleges because Harvard didn't allow women, but they both held law degrees. Both of them were highly intelligent and highly educated people.
And I think in looking at his wife's career track and her abilities, you know, that probably exceeded her accomplishments in terms of what she was being permitted to accomplish in her chosen path, I think it gave him pause, probably. I think he was very much, very egalitarian, certainly before his time.
At the time, there was an understanding that women were teachers and men were professors. Elizabeth had a college degree. She came from a free-thinking family who taught her that she could do anything that she had wanted. But she was limited by the mores and the strictures of society.
Okay, things were worse in the 40s, let's face it. If a woman was looking for work and she went to the help wanted section of the newspaper, she had to look in help wanted women. There were some jobs that only men were offered, and jobs that only women were offered, and you could get away with it in those days. There's a very famous letter that has circulated to a woman who had applied as a cartoonist saying, "We do not hire girls. However, if you want to work with us, you can go to the coloring department."
William Marston wanted to address that. He had strong women in his life, and he saw that they were limited in their opportunities by the attitudes of the time.
He also worked with a woman who had become not only important to he and his wife, but also to the future of Wonder Woman. That woman was Olive Byrne.
And I think Wonder Woman was a way to begin to sort of crack that glass ceiling in a way, just to offer society a different archetype, a different representation of women.
He wrote some articles also eventually about comic books and why kids buy them, why they sell over 100 million comic books. And he came to the attention of Max Gaines and Jack Leibowitz at DC Comics. He became involved with them in an advisory capacity, and then he had an idea to create a comic book superhero following Superman and Batman that would imbue the personality and the complexities and the views of a woman on the world. And that began the creation of Suprema, whom editor Shelley Mayer would rechristen Wonder Woman as a catchier title.
All the superheroes prior to that were men, and I think it was his wife who actually suggested the possibility of doing a female version of it.
When you look at Wonder Woman as a creature created out of love, grace, strength, all the elements that he was considering at the time had origins in classic mythology. And I think creatively, it was a great choice to use these women, goddesses, as a backdrop to magically presenting Wonder Woman with her powers.
I mean, she's relating to Athena, she's relating to Aphrodite, she's really talking to them, they're real. William Moulton Marston was giving us permission to believe in real goddesses. Do you know how empowering that is?
There's a couple of reasons why comics work for new ideas. Especially when Marston creates Wonder Woman in the 40s. A lot of the readers were very young and impressionable.
Comic books have always been reflectors of a changing American culture. They have always reflected our changing views, our slang, our fads, our mores, our biases and our prejudices, unfortunately. They are the mirror of our society since the days of the Depression.
I think by the time Marston came to create Wonder Woman, he was already a known figure. So while of course he was interested in whatever money he could make off of it, really the idea of how he could influence the youth, what he could do by introducing a character, and the kinds of frankly subversive messages he could introduce into this kind of literature, I think that was very fascinating to him and very much at the forefront of his thinking as he developed and created the character. It probably would have been very easy for him, bright as he was, to look at Superman, look at Batman, and come up with an amalgam character.
I believe that the reason is because he knew he could reach minds when they were young enough that he could actually make a difference. Not only that, not only was he reaching the kids, but comic books during the World War II era were tremendously popular with young servicemen.
Wonder Woman coming along in 1941 comes along at a very propitious time in terms of women in America. You know, it's the time of Rosie the Riveter. It's the time of all of a sudden all the men are at war.
It became very necessary for women to enter the workforce.
By the time the men came home from the war, the cat had been let out of the bag, right? I mean, it took most of the 50s for women to sort of, you know, say, wait a minute, we're not going back, just gonna go bake cookies and stay home and be the wives now. You know, we wanna be in the workforce too. We've seen what that's like. You know, Wonder Woman is very much of that era. And she's that, you know, World War II, self-starting, not dependent on anyone because there's no one around to depend on kind of character.
I don't think it bothered Marston that comics were for kids because he was doing this for girls, specifically for girls. I truly believe that he tapped into a female collective unconscious. Well, of course, it's interesting that because she's the first female superhero really in comic books, that she should have the aid of magical things that are jewelry, that are what women wear, bracelets.
Wonder Woman's bracelets were inspired by Olive Byrne, who was Marston and his wife's assistant.
You know, obviously, you know, Superman isn't going to wear magic bracelets or magic earrings. She also, you know, she used to receive telepathic messages from her earrings. These are female things, and it's, you know, simply because Marston was such a good psychologist that he understood that if you have a female superhero, you give her important jewelry. That's lovely. And the magic lasso also, of course, it's gold, you know, it's made of links of gold. Again, this is like jewelry. But of course, also there's the fact that he was very interested in the truth. Because the magic lasso makes the person who is lassoed tell the truth, whether they want to or not.
It's very interesting, isn't it, that there's this strange connection between the lie detector, which Marston had a hand in creating, and then this Wonder Woman device. He was very interested in deception. And so when he came to create this character, he gave that power to her and put it in the form of this glowing magic lasso.
But I think there's a more important point with the jewelry and the clothing and the hair, is that he wants this character to be feminine. This is a feminine character. He believes that women's femininity is also their strength.
Marston believed that men were anarchistic and violent, women were steady and reliable and loving, and if the men would submit to the love of the women, that the world would be a peaceful place.
In today's world, one could really make a very good case for the fact that the world would be better if it was run by women.
Those were the two principles that guided Marston through all of his work: truth and power of women.
Just as the archetype began to arise for a Superman to save us, to redeem us from the evil that was now pouring into the world, I think the same hue and cry came up for women.
You know, Wonder Woman in many ways is the flip side to Superman.
Superman is the Messiah figure. He's the stranger who comes from another planet to save us from ourselves. Batman is a figure of revenge. Batman is driven by this need to avenge the death of his parents. Wonder Woman's motivations are more ethereal.
It's the idea that she loves unconditionally, and that people can have faith and belief in themselves and find the strength in themselves, and she instills that in others.
The way that the Wonder Woman character was introduced was very much a subversive way of making sure that the boys stuck around. You know, if you start with the fighter pilot in the plane, you know, flying on a mission and the dogfight, you know, that was a very traditional setup at the time. You had lots of adventure comics and war comics and all that kind of stuff. So you're following this character, and if you're a little 10-year-old kid or an 8-year-old kid, and that's kind of cool. Then he crashes on this mysterious island. That's kind of cool. And all of a sudden, wham! You know, these women out of nowhere, and by that point, you're hooked into the story, and you want to know what happens to the pilot, and you're subtly kind of redirected to a completely different protagonist. I think he definitely tried to introduce a new element in the cultural zeitgeist that took, 30 years to take root. This is about strength, independence, uniqueness. This is not Donna Reed.
I think Morrison was completely sincere in his feminism and was a voice crying in the wilderness back then. And there weren't many people talking about the empowerment of women on any level. That doesn't change the fact that Diana Prince and the Holiday Girls got tied up and chained and locked.
You constantly had women imperiled. You saw that often in the movies. That was then reflected in the comic books.
Marston had these sort of strange, eccentric ideas about the role of women and the role of social control that he expressed visually, perhaps in a way that was outside of the narrative that was acceptable for these kind of stories.
When you look at the early Wonder Woman stories, there is elements of sexuality that show up. Betty Grable, who was one of the top pinups at the time, wore outfits that looked pretty much exactly like Wonder Woman's, and yet people didn't criticize her for being nearly naked. The same costume was on Wonder Woman in red, white, and blue with an eagle on the chest, and people had criticisms about it, that it was too much to show the children. Well, why is it that starlets and movie stars can dress this way and be painted on the side of bombers, but a comic book character can't?
When you attack society's, sacred cows, society tends to retaliate. The very sensuous nature of the artwork probably made some people uncomfortable. And I think that might have garnered Marston some unwanted attention from critics.
The more dominant male, subservient female came mostly after World War II, when everybody, including the government, was anxious to get women back into the home and raising their children, and that's where the repression came from.
A flood tide of filth is engulfing our country in the form of newsstand obscenity and is threatening to pervert an entire generation of our American children.
I was very much aware of Wortham and the censorship that he wreaked in the comic book area. As a matter of fact, I was particularly aware of it because Wortham was very active at the same time I started Playboy.
After Wortham wrote the book, all comic books were subjected to scrutiny, including Wonder Woman.
William Marston suffered from polio later on in his life, and this exacerbated his health problems. What contributed to that was his responsibilities. He had a large family to take care of, and he also worked very, very hard on Wonder Woman, to the point that when he had died, they weren't even sure if they could continue the strip without him.
It's unfortunate that Marston didn't live long enough to see how impactful his creation became.
In 1968, Denny O'Neil came on as Wonder Woman's writer. And it's ironic that during the most politically aware time in American history, at the time when women were at their strongest, she gained feminism, but at the loss of her own identity.
In the 60s, mid to late 60s, she became an everyday mortal woman, dressed like Emma Peel, and went out with her male mentor, who was the blind John Steed to her Emma Peel, and kicked a lot of ass, took a lot of names, fired a lot of guns, which was antithetical to her way of being.
Denny O'Neil made a significant change in Wonder Woman.
Yeah, from my perspective, I was serving feminism by those changes. There was a lot of disagreement about that. But I thought she got her powers from basically gods, and that she was more admirable if she were a normal, physically normal woman who acquired the skills that she needed to do what she does. So I thought I was being a feminist. I didn't want to make her beholden to men, and yet I gave her an old man mentor.
Wonder Woman in her Emma Peel jumpsuit and her mentor I Ching was not Wonder Woman. How can you call someone Wonder Woman when they're not wearing the red, white, and blue costume with the eagle on the chest, and when they don't have their golden lasso anymore? It was another character.
I think that they thought that they were trying to grasp on to the women's movement.
One of the main stories that was emerging in the 1960s was the liberation of women through birth control, through having more civil rights than ever before, through moving into different echelons of power, poking the glass ceiling, getting some powerful jobs. So this is all happening, but the story needs an image.
The very first issue of Ms. Magazine featured Wonder Woman on the cover. Gloria Steinem championed that, but they didn't laugh her out of the boardroom when she suggested it. They all knew what Wonder Woman had meant in their lives.
So they decided that Wonder Woman had saved them in their youth, and so they in turn decided to save Wonder Woman. When Ms. adopted her as a symbol of their values, Wonder Woman has, no matter what they do to her in the comics, everybody can recognize her as an example of female empowerment. That in itself is really powerful and revolutionary.
Wonder Woman became emblematic of the emerging power of women and also the demand for equal rights.
She's an icon. She's immediately recognizable. And when you see that icon, you think strong woman, strong, competent, independent woman.
Well, I think that what is unique about Wonder Woman is a combination of strength and beauty and brains. And I think that makes a complete person.
It all came out of Marston's background as an inventor of the lie detector and interested in truth and honesty and integrity.
She's strong, she's intelligent, she's powerful, and she's fighting for our rights.
She's really entrenched herself as the ultimate kind of feminine icon.
Even though so much progress has been made on the rights issues since the time of the 40s, she still stands as the ultimate symbol of equality.
Marston's legacy is that not only did he send this message out to the male readers with the most recognizable female comic book icon ever, but he also sent that message to the girls in the audience who were reading.
As our society changes in terms of its views of women and women in the workplace and women politically, as all that changes, there will be changes to Wonder Woman. But at the end of the day, I think that the woman that we always knew from the beginning, who was put on this planet to lead men who were really incapable of leading themselves beyond a world of violence, to lead them to a place of peace and love and understanding, is the mission that Wonder Woman will always be on, that will always be appealing to an audience, whether it be female or male, that will always set her apart from the slugfests found in Superman and Batman and the other male superheroes. And as a result, as she has proven since the early 40s, she will endure. She has a place, and it's her own.
Ever since I started reading Wonder Woman, I've gone through life really influenced by Wonder Woman. I mean, the concept of Wonder Woman has always been with me. The concept of Wonder Woman never left me.